Early on.
Yeah, it's just connecting to the server, so
Okay.
momentarily.
Fun.
And can you also get in the chat on YouTube so you can...
Oh, do you want me to type in it?
Yeah, if you'd like.
I can't.
Don't worry about it then. All right, we're
I tell.
live.
Sorry, I'll tell you why I can't in a second.
No, it's okay, no worries. So it looks like we got 5 people tuning in. Hello, welcome, comrades, and welcome to our debut episode of The Mel's, where your 2 favorite Marxist-Leninist trans women, both named Mel, talk about theory, history, and current events. I'm Melody, and this is my channel called A World to Win.
And I'm Melanie, and I'm just a ML that sits on Twitter. My Twitter handle is Milk Tea Leninism, and basically all I do is talk about Marxist Leninism, imperialism within like East Asia, and just mostly trans stuff in terms of like LGBTQA. That's really it.
All right, and today we are talking about Vladimir Lenin's 1917 book, The State and Revolution, or if you prefer, Государство и революция, Государство и революция in the original Russian. As a quick disclaimer, while we are going to provide a short summary of the text, we're not going to be explaining it in detail. If you haven't read the text, we highly recommend that you do so, uh, as you'll get a lot more out of our conversation if you know it relatively well. If you haven't read it, we'd urge you to still stick around, as we'll be talking plenty about uh, things that don't require you to have read the text. That being said, if you need a good companion to this book, we highly recommend Revolutionary Left Radio's podcast episode on it, as it goes through and explains the text systematically. What we're going to be doing today, after giving our short summary of the book, is to contextualize its meaning for us in the 21st century United States, particularly in the wake of Bernie Sanders' loss to Joe Biden in the Democratic presidential primary. While Bernie Sanders is not what either of us would necessarily call a socialist, he nevertheless, the modest social reforms and message of political revolution clearly energized people in a way not seen in the U.S. political landscape for a very long time. Um, we will be presenting ideas today that may seem overly harsh to people who have recently been supporters of Bernie Sanders. Uh, just know that the criticisms we'll be presenting today are in service of strengthening the socialist movement, not simply taking shots at one particular politician, uh, and not here to, scold or moralize anybody. So anyone who follows this channel knows that I'm a pretty outspoken critic of left electoralism in the United States, and that I have directed a good measure of invective towards those who advocate running so-called socialist candidates on the Democratic Party ballot line, a strategy that some have called the dirty break, or ballot line strategy, advocated prominently by the Jacobin editorial staff. So today we'll be approaching these problems using Lenin's The State and Revolution as our theoretical point of departure. Many of you out there must be feeling a deep sense of betrayal and disappointment at Bernie's loss and subsequent endorsement of the racist and rapist Joe Biden. And once again, we're not here to scoff, scold, or condescend to you, but to welcome you with open arms to the fold of revolutionary politics. In Lenin's own words, it is not in the hundreds or the thousands, but in the hundreds of thousands and millions that where real politics begin. We need you in this fight. So let's start here in just a moment with a quick explainer of this critical piece of Marxist-Leninist theory. And I'm also going to switch over so that you can see my co-host's lovely face. Just a second here.
Oh, sorry, I turned my camera off because I didn't know if you
Quite
could
all
hear
right.
that.
Well, there you are. Um, so So, what is the state and revolution all about? Before we answer that question, we have to look at what it was responding to, because that's what this book is. It's a direct reaction to existing trends in the socialist movement of its time. Right up until 1914, the German Social Democratic Party, or SPD, was in many ways kind of the poster child for what Marxism could achieve as a political movement of the working class for itself, i.e., organically, the movement came from the working class and was fighting in its interests. At least on paper, that's what it was doing. The SPD was formed in 1863 and endured many years as an illegal organization until 1890, when the German state finally lifted its anti-socialist laws. The party grew quickly, winning many seats in parliament and some extensive social reforms for the German working class. However, that came at a cost. Uh-oh, hold on a sec. I can't. Can I? There we go. That should fix it so you can actually see Melanie's face. Um, However, this was to come at a cost. Marxism in this form was defanged, reduced to a left wing of bourgeois democracy. Theorists such as Edward Bernstein, in his book Evolutionary Socialism, opined that capitalism had not followed the catastrophic course that Marx had predicted, and that it was thus violent revolution was not necessary. It could be revised out of Marx's theory, hence the term revisionism. Socialists of this persuasion believed that capitalism could be gradually legislated away by attaining socialist majorities in bourgeois parliaments. So pay attention to that, because we're going to be talking about that a lot in our discussion. So there were, of course, revolutionaries such as Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, who remained in the SPD for a time at least, and they resisted this distortion of Marxism, keeping the revolutionary flame of Marxism lit even as the party grew increasingly tied to the capitalist system. In 1914, this revisionist trend showed its true face as the SPD, along with the big socialist parties of Western Europe, sided with their respective ruling capitalist classes in entering into World War I in an egregious betrayal of the roots of Marxist politics. Their perfidy was called out by comrades within the party such as Luxemburg and Liebknecht, but also, of course, by Lenin. This is what state and revolution is all about. Lenin is taking the revisionists to task on their fundamental distortion of Marx and Engels on the question of the state. According to Lenin, those who sought this parliamentary road to socialism had not jettisoned Marx's original writings on the state simply because they believed them to be incorrect, but because it was also in their material interest to do so. A party member could climb the ladder and give themselves a cushy desk job either in the party bureaucracy itself or some administrative role within the bourgeois state. While certainly many people joined the party because they wanted to build a better world, there were opportunists who saw this as a chance at a comfortable station. It was this class layer, what Lenin and others such as Eugene Debs called the labor aristocracy, in whose interests the party was ultimately beholden to and steered by, and thus, indirectly, to the bourgeoisie and to capitalism itself. It is worth noting here that although Lenin does not touch on this topic in the book, the social chauvinists, whom he lambasts deliberately, obscured, among other things, colonialism and imperialism's role in capitalism, and just why capitalism appeared to have stabilized in that period. This topic was tackled head-on by Rosa Luxemburg in her book called The Accumulation of Capital and Other Writings. Such people, the opportunists, had found their way to the top as leaders of the socialist movement, and this, for Lenin, could not stand. His solution in the State and Revolution was relatively simple: to rebuff these charlatans of socialism by reiterating key passages from Marx and Engels' original works on the state. While the book contains some of Lenin's own original insights, it is remarkable in that a great deal of it consists in him presenting and contextualizing long quotations from Marx and Engels. Through this, he shows that the parliamentary cretins of German social democracy had robbed Marxist theory of its revolutionary vigor and turned it into a toothless servant of capitalism. Now, that's what the State and Revolution does. But as I said earlier, we're not here to provide an in-depth summary. If you need that, again, Rev Left Radio's episode on it is excellent, and we will link that later on. But just for those who haven't read it yet, the kind of bullet point summary of the State and Revolution can be distilled into these points. First, the state is not neutral. It's not like this mediating like referee that liberals kind of imagine is like, it like mediates the classes and keeps them from tearing each other's throats out or whatever. It's this kind of liberal conception of the state. It is a definite social structure created with the purpose of class rule. So the state is, again, not just some like thing that exists, outside and above society. It's like it's part of the way that capitalism is constituted, and it's has this concrete purpose, which is, the rule of the bourgeoisie over the proletariat and other subaltern classes. Second point, in the case of a capitalist state, this ties immediately into what I just said. The state capitalist states institutions are ones that are, oriented around things like preserving private property relations and, maintaining special bodies of what Engels called special bodies of armed men. So like, ICE and the cops and the NSA and, deep state and all the lovely stuff that we're all unfortunately a little bit too familiar with. So thus, the goal of the socialist movement, next point, the goal of the socialist movement should not be to take over the existing capitalist state institutions, but to systematically dismantle them, to smash them, and replace them with a new set of institutions, a workers' state. So yeah, like going back to the previous point, there's no way to make ICE socialist. Like ICE is an institution that's used to repress migrants, and the cops are an institution that's a racialized function to uh, discipline and whatnot. Sorry, I kind of got off track there, but
That's okay.
but yeah, so you can't just have like ICE with socialist characteristics. It doesn't work like that. That's bad. That would be bad. You just had ICE with like Bernie Sanders in charge of it. That would be still bad because it would still be ICE. So with the advent of a workers' state, it would still be an instrument of class rule, but it would be the rule of the working class over the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie won't give up its power willingly. Thus, in addition to the violence of revolution being necessary to displace them from power, you also have to hang on to that power after you've done that, which is, in the context of the State and Revolution, noted by Lenin, quoting Marx on his writings on the Paris Commune, where that showed that the working class had to both establish kind of its own new institutions, but then also, and this is what they failed to do, was to be able to not just to win win themselves into power, but then also to suppress the bourgeoisie. Now, there are other conditions that made that kind of, well, we don't need to get into that here, but yeah, so that kind of provides us our loose theoretical beginnings for this discussion. So um, we're coming into this context now in the US where kind of the dominant uh, strain, I guess, of socialist politics as presented, not necessarily, like, again, we're not necessarily endorsing these as socialist politics by talking about them like this, but people are talking about Bernie Sanders and other things as if they were socialists. So that's our point of reference here. So that strategy of whatever you want to call it, entryism, or what the folks at Jacobin call the dirty break or the ballot line strategy, that has not been going so well, and it's been showing to just kind of provide more ammunition to the Democratic Party, which is itself not a social democratic party at all. It's not even a labor party. It's none of those things. It's fundamentally has incredibly racist history. And even though there's the whole transition in the period after the New Deal, they still every year they still have the so-called Jefferson Jackson dinner, um, which is
Jesus.
yeah, no, it's gross. So these guys are a ruling class party. They're not our friends, and yeah, I was hoping that in our conversation, Mel and Mel could we could discuss kind of the implications of state and rev for um, kind of this moment and the kind of seeing uh, the Sanders movement kind of crash on the rocks, and to have him turn around and endorse Joe Biden being kind of a giant slap to the face. Anyway, that was my intro. So um, we could get into all kinds of different topics here. I have
Oh yeah, I wasn't sure where you wanted to go with
yeah,
this.
no, I just like I just kind of introduced the section, so I was thinking that we could kind of freeform from there. I have a bunch of different topics that we could kind of spin off of. I have documents. There's that one document that you found, the one that's Lenin's writing on I think the 1912 U.S. election. Is that the one that you found?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Let me double check.
I think it would be really interesting, and it's relatively short, if I recall
Okay.
correctly. I think it would be worth our time to read that if you'd be so inclined.
Oh god, do I have to read this?
Well, we'll get start and see where it goes.
Okay, well, can I give you the copy?
Just a sec. I'm gonna have to read it off of my phone because
Is that okay?
whoop.
Tell me what you want it on. Sorry,
Just send it to me on Discord.
okay. I'm just a nervous person, so
Hey, no worries. I got us.
I mean, I'll start. I'll try and read. I'll try
Okay.
and read for the class. I'm a nervous person.
Okay, well, yeah, you said I have the link, so if you trail off or you want me to take a turn or whatever, we can just go
Oh,
back and
sure.
forth, whatever works best for
So
you.
this is definitely out of like a just a Lenin collected works, and it's his take on the results and significance of the U.S. presidential elections of 1912. Wilson, a Democrat, has never been elected president of the United States of America. He has polled over 6 million votes, Roosevelt with the New Progressive Party over 4 million, Taft with the Republicans with 3, and socialist Eugene Debs with 800,000 votes. The word significance of the US elections lies not so much in the great increase of number of socialist votes as in far-reaching crisis of bourgeois parties, in the amazing force in which their decay has been revealed. Lastly, the significance of the elections lie in the unusually clear and striking revelation of the bourgeois reformism as a means of combating socialism. In all bourgeois countries, the parties in which stand for capitalism, i.e., the bourgeois parties, came into being a long time ago, and for the greater extent of political liberty, the more solid they are. Freedom in the United States is most complete, and for a whole half century since the Civil War over slavery in 1860 to 65, two bourgeois parties have been distinguished there by remarkable solidity and strength. The party of the former slave owners is the so-called Democratic Party. The Capitalist Party, which favored the emancipation of the Negroes, has been developed into the Republican Party. Since the emancipation, sorry, since the emancipation of the Negro, the distinction between two parties has been diminishing. The fight between these two parties has been mainly over the height of customs duties. Their fight has not had any serious importance since the mass of the people. The people have been deceived and diverted from their vital interests by the means of spectacular and meaningless duels between the two bourgeois parties. This so-called bipartisan system prevailing in America and Britain has been one of the most powerful means of preventing the rise of independent working class, i.e., a genuine socialist party. And now the bipartisan system has suffered a fiasco in America, the country boasting the most advanced capitalism. What has caused this fiasco? The strength of the working class movement, the growth of socialism. The old bourgeois parties, the Democrat and the Republican, have been facing towards the past the period of the emancipation of the Negro. The new bourgeois party, the new progressive party, is also facing towards the future. Its program turns entirely on the question whether capitalism is or to not to be on the issues to be specific to is that to be? I think to be specific of the protection of the workers and of the trusts, as the capitalist associations are called in the United States. The old parties are a product of an epoch whose task was to develop capitalism as speedily as possible. The struggle between the parties was over the question of how best to expedite and facilitate this development. The new party is a proje- is that The new party is a product of the present epoch, which raises the issue of the very existence of capitalism in the United States, the freest, most advanced country. This issue is coming from the fore clearly and broadly than broadly than anywhere else. The entire program and the entire agitation of Roosevelt and the progressives turn on how to save capitalism by means of bourgeois reforms. The bourgeois reformisms in which old Europe manifests itself in the clatter of liberal professors has at once come forward in free American Republic as 4 million party strong. This is American style. We shall save capitalism by reform, says the party. We shall grant the most progressive factory legislation. We shall establish state control over all trusts in the United States. That means over all industries. We shall establish state control over them and eliminate poverty and enable everyone to earn decent wages. We shall establish social and industrial justice. We revere all reforms, and the only reform we don't want to expropriate is the capitalists. The national wealth of the United States is now reckoned to be 120 billion, i.e., about 240 billion rubles. Approximately one third of it, or about 8 billion rubles, belongs to two trusts, those Rockefeller and Morgan, who are subordinated to these trusts. No more than 40,000 families making up those two trusts are the masters of 80 million wage slaves. Obviously, so long as these modern slave owners there are, all reforms will nothing be but a deception. Roosevelt has been deliberately hired by astute multimillionaires to preach this deception. The state control they promise will become, if the capitalists keep their capital, a means of combating and crushing strikes. But the American proletariat has already been awakened and has taken up his post. He greets Roosevelt's access with cheerful irony, as is to say, "You lured 4 million people with your promises of reform, dear impostor Roosevelt. Very well. Tomorrow these 4 million will see that your promises were a fraud, and don't forget that they are following you not only because they feel that it's impossible to go on living the old way." And that's the end of the.
Yeah, that was good. You
Oh
know,
God, I'm
it's
so nervous when I read.
oh, you were good. You're great, hun. Don't worry about it. So I think what's remarkable about that is that also feels like it could have been written yesterday.
Yeah, no, I actually think about this passage a lot. Like I like so like when I the very first election I ever elected in, I voted for Mitt Romney. This was when I was like super right wing. And it's really interesting, like how much people don't really care about like who wins the electoral college. Like it's all about the popular vote. Like even for popular and unpopular candidates, people really love like fixating on like, well, if this person won the most popular votes, like why isn't he president? That was the whole contingent with like the 2016 election. Is the 3 million votes that they constantly like talked about on the news, and like it set the Democratic Party into this weird like progressive tailspin where they had to basically like they had to one up Hillary somehow. Like they had to get someone better.
Yeah.
Like electoralism is just wild.
Yeah, and I think it's really funny that we that person ended up being Joe Biden. Like
Oh yeah, no, like he's such
who's the
like
most, like, I think it's really funny how, like, hmm let's see, like, this is like getting inside the heads of Democratic strategists in 2016. Well, our out of touch bougie white lady was a total failure. So you know what we should go with? Oh yeah, someone who's like even more like crusty and out of touch. Like that's really the direction that they decided to go in. Um, um, but I think it's uh, I guess yeah. So the thing that this dirty
you're
break
okay.
strategy. What?
Oh, I was just making sure. Okay.
Yeah, no, no, everything's cool. I just was searching for my words for a minute, which, it's fine. I'm cool. Um,
Mhm.
the one of the things that this like so-called dirty break strategy relies on is this fundamental. This is exactly what Lenin attacks in the State and Revolution, which is this notion that we're that the state can be like one, or that like socialists can kind of get their foot in the door somehow. And like it's true that the Bolsheviks ran in elections at times, but they were doing so with a fundamentally different purpose in mind. They were, participating in very limited sense to do, propaganda and, to because, they wanted to reach people. They were not doing it because they thought, oh, well, we can join the government and like make socialism happen that way. Um,
Yeah.
and like yeah, and I think it's like there's fundamentally uh, just yeah, like this kind of misunderstanding of uh, the what the role of the state is. Um, and there's kind of like lip service to it. Like you'll see, you know, pieces in like Jacobin or whatever talking about, racial injustice or whatever, but like
Right.
not really recognizing that, this state strategy, this like very this strategy that's so fixated on winning elections is like fundamentally in contradiction with a thing with an orientation towards racial justice.
Yeah. Right.
Because the political franchise is so limited to not exclusively but disproportionately towards wealthy and white people in the United States.
And that's like it's also like a super huge cultural thing. Like if you look at like every major like piece of like legislation that was about racial like civil liberties or civil rights, they were only usually elected on because it like gave breadcrumbs or like contingency for the greater population to just be okay with something, even if there was a lot of people, like enough people that like had enough discontent for it, especially after like the 1965 Civil Rights Act was like a big deal. Um, and it's just like America has this like strange fixation with like popular opinion versus like electoralism. Um,
Well, and then there was that I think it was from either Harvard or Princeton, I can't remember. There was like a political science study that they did where they basically like tracked on several different issues how uh, like popular opinion versus legislations that were passed, and they
yeah.
found out that it was like there was a near zero correlation between public opinion on, like, for example, like healthcare and legislation that actually got passed.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah,
that
that happens
it
a
was
lot.
the words that they used, and this is important because it has a very specific meaning in the context of like scientific papers, is a statistically insignificant impact, which means
Mhm.
that I mean, like in I could it's the language is pretty academic, but it's saying pretty much unequivocally your vote does not matter. Your like yeah, public opinion has zero impact on what kind of legislation actually gets, I mean, not, yeah, gets put through. But so the folks who are here, I just we put out a couple of articles that were recommended reading for kind of a companion to this episode, and I thought I'd just take a second to read a little bit out of this. Is link is at leftvoice.org. And I can post links in the chat in just a second here. I'm going to do that. Um, and then I will read from this article because it's got a passage in it that I think is really critical to our discussion right now. So just give me a moment. There we go. So here is the article. This is the first part of the article I just linked in the chat from Left Voice magazine. Um, So this is with respect to the so-called ballot line strategy of running socialist candidates on the Democratic Party. Uh, as socialists adapt to the Democratic Party's ballot line, they also adapt to bourgeois ideas. Here, consciously, there unconsciously, the left is adapting to liberalism. This phenomenon is most apparent looking at Jacobin magazine, the most significant publication of the US left. While the publication's editorial line always tended towards left social democratic politics, with the intermittent publication of revolutionary socialist writers, it has transformed itself into a campaign blog for Bernie Sanders. Every day, Jacobin publishes glowing praise of every aspect of Sanders. Rather than critically supporting the campaign, Jacobin has aimed to paper over all the criticisms of it, both from the right and from the left. This is, by the way, this article is uh, from some time ago, but it's still relevant um, because these people haven't given up their line that we can actually win using this strategy. Um, the recent publication of an article portraying Sanders as a committed internationalist was particularly egregious example, given Sanders' long-standing record of supporting imperialism. Yeah, and I think that really gets into these contradictions of like the Democratic Party and like the problems that Lenin is speaking to in the State and Revolution, which is the problems of social chauvinism and imperialism, which is to say that, if you want to run socialists on the ballot line, it's not like it comes with no strings attached. Like the Democratic Party, even they won't let you have a revolutionary stance towards, say, like Iran or Venezuela. Like if you're not towing the official line that Iran is a terrorist state and Nicolas Maduro is an evil dictator who, sorry, what, you're Hun, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Oh,
Go for it.
oh my God. It was kind of like the thing with,
We just lost you again.
oh shit, sorry. It was like Bernie Sanders like doing that interview where he talked about how much he like praised the Sandinistas, and then like when he stands on the debate stages, he's just like, they did some okay things, but I don't like totalitarianism and all this like weird posturing. Like I can't tell if like, and like a lot of the Bernie people were saying he was just like hiding his power level, but I'm like, man, if Bernie was like really the like left wing radical we all dream of, he would have went harder.
Yeah.
He
Yeah, that's
never
just
would
kind
have
of
like,
giving him too much rope. Like,
yeah, no, he
way
would
too
have
much
walked up
rope.
there. Yeah, he would have walked up there if he was like really like hiding his power level in the last debate. He would have been like, "Yeah, I support the DPRK." Like he would have like threw some shit out of like left field.
Oh, Michaela's here. Hello, Michaela.
And I really think that's what he would have done if he was really like into that kind of like identity. Like he would just do it. But he's not that person.
Yeah, I
And I
think,
think he also postured way too much on like his supporters. Like he's under this impression that like if I fail a million times, it doesn't matter. I'm growing this movement every single time.
yeah.
But
So,
like
like,
it's not at the critical mass or even
right.
remotely equipped or prepared to do anything that's even like remotely like
Yeah.
revolutionary.
And I mean, like, I guess the thing is, there's that slogan, Bernie or bust. Like, I'm really I'm missing where the bust part is. What is bust, right? Like, does that mean we're just like gonna vote third party? Like, I'm not saying it's like the bust part is bad. I think it's just an empty threat,
Yeah. I,
unless you
I
say, unless we get, again, like I'm not adopting this position. I'm just putting myself in someone else's shoes for a minute here, which
yeah,
is
no, I wasn't saying that.
supposing that that you really wanted to kind of take the Democratic Party hostage like that and say, if we don't make Bernie the nominee, then we're gonna vote for Howie Hawkins or whoever, um, or Vermin Supreme, whatever your taste may be. Um, like there was never any like programmatic commitment to that on the part of either anybody in the Bernie campaign or like anyone peripherally involved. Like, certainly like Jacobin would never publish something like that. In fact,
No,
they
never.
routinely kind of punch left when it comes to, um, well, we all know they love to shit on anarchists, but you know, they're in classic Sokdem fashion, kind of shitting on anyone who's not towing the Sokdem line, which is to say that, and oh my gosh, I have to find, there's a quotation in State and Rev that I'm now just thinking about where Lenin basically says that Sokdems call anyone who's remotely to their left anarchists. Where's this part? I have to
Oh
look for
no.
it. Hold on. It's like a little hilarious how like germane this is to kind of how they keep punching left to find it. Um, I'm not gonna go hunting for it right now. Maybe.
No, it's okay.
Oh, I'm almost there. Oh, I'm almost I'm finding it. I'm finding it. I'm finding it. So this is going to be a little bit oblique, but it is roughly speaking what I'm talking about. This is from chapter 3 in the Haymarket edition. It's on page 90. Yeah, yeah. So here it is. The opportunist has so much forgotten how to think in a revolutionary way and to dwell on revolution, that he attributes so-called federalism to Marx, which he confuses with whom he confuses with the founder of anarchism, Proudhon. As for Kautsky and Plekhanov, who claim to be orthodox Marxists and defenders of the theory of revolutionary Marxism, they are silent on this point. Here are one of the roots of the extreme vulgarization of the views on this difference between Marxism and anarchism, which is characteristic of both the Kautskyites and the opportunists, and which we shall discuss again later. Uh, do, 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 do. Yeah, no, I'm not gonna go hunting for that specific quote, but um,
No
it's in that
worries.
general territory.
Yeah.
So I'm going to actually take a second to look at chat here and respond to some things. First of all, shout outs to uh, Brianna and Simba for being here. And hello, Eve. And hello, Queer POTUS and Michaela. Um, Michaela says, has there been any indication that Bernie supporters will continue the work? I remember 2016, a bunch of people joined DSA, but this time it just kind of ended. Okay, yeah, and that's the kind of thing it's really hard to make prognostications like that, because like the mass of there's such a diverse kind of kinds of people who are involved with the Bernie campaign, and it's like everyone from like DSA people to just like, it's hard to disentangle. And like certainly DSA, I would say, is not, because DSA is so ideologically heterogeneous, like because there's so many different like the biggest tendency in DSA, if I'm not mistaken, is actually the anarchist caucus, the so-called libertarian socialist caucus, which is
Hmm.
certainly like they're definitely a much more revolutionary orientation than the kind of Jacobin wing of DSA. Um, and they do things like promote like mutual aid and advocate for what they call dual power and that sort of thing, which is all well and good. But so like that's, I guess, to answer the question is, uh, without pretending like I have all the answers, because of course I don't, but um, is to say that, I mean, I think a lot of Bernie supporters are going, and this is kind of what we're doing here, in terms of our conversation, which is that you know there's probably going to be potentially millions of Bernie supporters who are feel totally stabbed in the back by this moment of Bernie telling turning around and telling them to go vote for Joe Biden. Despite the fact that we kind of already went through this in 2016, I think like the fact that it's happening again is just makes it all the more like kind of repugnant, I guess. Like, and it kind of shows Bernie up as a fraud, in my opinion. Um, or if you prefer a more uh, conventional political science term, a sheepdog, which is something that many on the revolutionary left have kind of criticized Sanders for, in terms of just kind of you know uh, he whether his kind of intentions in running for on the Democratic Party's primary are like sincere or not is a little beside the point, because what he ends up doing is kind of giving them legitimacy by lending his voice, which a lot of people resonate with, to this party, which is fundamentally like programmatically antithetical to anything he wants. um like, so it's kind of like saying, like, even if you really like it's one thing, like I think maybe like to say that he's like doing this maliciously kind of puts some people off. I mean, I personally do think that way. I think he is being a charlatan and a trickster by doing that. But I think even to give it a charitable reading, even to say, yeah, he's doing this sincerely, um, kind of like it still shows him up as somebody who's at best kind of naive about how the party's going to treat him. I don't know. Mel, do you have any thoughts on that?
Uh, well, so like when I think of the question, it depends on, I guess, what precedent you think he set the country for. Um, I think Bernie ultimately isn't a. I think Bernie ultimately like is a good thing for precedent. Um, as much as I'm like disappointed that like a lot of his supporters like didn't really do anything. I mean, just like getting someone into this sort of political ideology, I think is really important. Like it sets people on the path. But there is sort of this weird kind of doomerism that I see happening a lot because the Democrats just keep winning. Like the DNC just keeps winning no matter what. And they just keep picking all these like really milquetoast the same candidate. Like Obama and Biden and Clinton are all the same person. They all do the same things.
Hmm.
I I don't think Bernie's necessarily a huckster. I think maybe he's at this point where he's tired and he's just given up, you know?
Bernie the Doomer.
Yeah, like I don't know. I just feel that like they didn't really I don't even feel like the DSA even did a lot. Like I look at like the numbers of like the IWW and like the SRA and like the
Hmm.
PSL and like even like the WWP and like I just to see all these organizations like their numbers are like doubling and tripling.
Yeah, and there was definitely like that happened. I mean, that happened also after 2016. I have a couple friends in, various, relatively small leftist, sects or parties like PSL or Workers' World or whatever. There's many of them, but they all reported that they added like they doubled their members, or they even more modestly like they added 10%. I mean, that's still significant. 10% growth
Yeah,
is nothing to sneeze at.
scoff at, yeah.
Um, but nonetheless, like, um, yeah, if I guess the line that I always, I guess, try to challenge people on is the, again, like kind of circle back to what I was talking about before, which is like, what's the or bust? If it's really Bernie or bust, what's the or bust?
Well, my solution is always like if you don't like so I get a lot of people that I don't know if they're libs or they're like suck dems or they're like libertarian socialists or whatever. I like can I say bread tube? um
It's like you can use, I feel like you can use like Jacobin and BreadTube interchangeably because they basically stand for the
yeah.
same shit.
And like these people like will get really angry. Like they'll tell me because they'll assume I'm a Bernie or Buster because I don't want to vote for Sanders or Biden or any of these people, you know? And then they assume that like, oh well, I'm being like like someone basically said that I don't care about trans people because I don't want to vote for Joe Biden because apparently Joe Biden is going to keep all of us safe.
Oh, well,
But if
thanks
you've
for
watched
informing me.
but like the federal Ninth District and Seventh District courts are loaded with Republican judges. Ruth Bader Ginsburg might die, and they might get a conservative if he wins the election. Like Idaho just passed two horrendous trans bills on March 31st, which happens to be trans, the Trans Day of Visibility,
Hmm.
So like it does like these are targeted bills. Joe Biden can't do anything as a Democrat when the courts are loaded with Republicans because it doesn't work that way. Because America has so many structures, institutions, and checks and balances that it makes it almost impossible to fix anything overnight without people actually fighting back. So when I always hear that notion that like voting for Joe Biden is going to be better for trans people, that doesn't help me. It doesn't do anything for me really if it's not already not in our favor. So
I was gonna say like that is and this is what disgusts me about just liberals about on that issue, which is that what they're doing is they're holding us hostage in that way.
yeah, and
Like
such yeah.
it's like it's in a way that like fundamentally is just like insulting to our agency as not only as just like human beings but like also as political actors and our ability to do anything outside the system, because you know the Dems of course, but like the liberals especially are just obsessed with legalism and coloring within the lines, which our identity as trans people is just like by definition not doing that.
Yeah, like we can't live within these kinds of existing frameworks. We have to live outside of them, or the system has to change to allow us to live within the system. Doesn't necessarily matter what system you want to go by. Um, I see this a lot with like racial things too as well, like
Hmm.
how like the Civil Rights Act was only passed because like white people were mad and the Panthers were like literally forming networks next to everybody else and they were doing well. And it was just like a big spook to like mainstream America. Like everything just become a spook. And so the only way to like quell everyone down and say, hey, like this is the way to go is pass this act. And like Lyndon Johnson like didn't he was kind of a racist. He didn't really care. Like
Oh,
it's
he's a Southern
like
Democrat. Is
yeah, he was a
classic,
Dixiecrat. Like
classically cut of that cloth.
he only accepted it be and like he like went on this like whole diatribe about how like oh well I did it because that's what that's what Jack would have done. And it's
Yeah.
like that's not how that like that's not like even Jack Kennedy was still kind of like I don't think I want to give the blacks TM the right to vote. And it's like and like it's it's just
I
like
have to
they've been
find. There's a
doing
great section of my favorite book here, which I'm trying to find.
no, it's fine. Like they've
Um,
been doing this for years and like you go back in history and you look at this kind of posturing they do, it's just disgusting. And like it hasn't changed for anyone.
right.
It's been 70 years. It's been almost
It's
it's been,
it's always been a measure to kind of keep the torches and pitchforks at bay. Um, and so I'm trying to find New Democrats, Party of the People, blah blah blah. Chapter 5. Democrats in the Obama era. This is from, I'm reading from the 2012 update of The Democrats, A Critical History by Lance Selfa, which is like one of my favorite go-tos for leftist critiques of the Democratic Party. Um, I'm just trying to, Truman years, blah, blah, blah. Defeat of Operation Dixie. Democrats and the Civil Rights Revolution. So this is on, if you want to get your hands on this book yourself, this is on page 142, 145. Oh, okay. Well, yeah, and I'm not going to read like this whole section, but I can start reading it and we can kind of see where it goes from there. Um,
sure.
So this section is on page 145, From Black Power to the New Black Vote. The experience of facing racist violence in the South, along with being disillusioned by sellouts from the Democratic politicians, radicalized a generation of Black activists who took up the banner of Black Power after 1965. For SNCC activists or SNCC, Atlantic City had marked a turning point that, quote, completed SNCC's alienation from the mainstream of the movement and its estrangement from the federal government and the Democratic Party. The treatment of the Freedom Democrats snapped the frayed ties that bound the SNCC to liberal values, to integration and nonviolence, and seeking solutions through the political process. The time had come for SNCC to formulate new goals and methods. To its battered and bloody field troops, the American dilemma had become irreconcilable, and the American dream a nightmare. Things could never be the same again, Snick's Cleveland Sellers wrote later. Never again were we lulled into believing that our task was exposing injustices so that good people of America could eliminate them. After Atlantic City, our struggle was not for civil rights, but for liberation. End quote. Perhaps the revolutionary Malcolm X spoke for this generation of activists. Malcolm expressed more clearly than other movement leaders the racist nature of the Democratic Party. When you keep the Democrats in power, Malcolm said in a 1964 speech to the Cleveland Core chapter, you're keeping the Dixiecrats in power. A vote for a Democrat is a vote for the Dixiecrats. It's time for you and me to become more politically mature and realize what the ballot is for, what we're supposed to get when we cast a ballot, and that if we don't cast a ballot, it's going to end up in a situation where we're going to have to cast a bullet. It's either the ballot or the bullet. Malcolm praised the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party activists' courage. Nevertheless, he argued uh, for a much more radical action, that much more radical action was needed. Thousands of black radicals realized the need to break from the Democrats in this period, identifying their political outlook with radical groups like the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. The BPP, formed by Bobby Seale and Huey Newton in Oakland, California in 1966, began as a small group of activists who challenged police brutality by dispatching armed patrols to monitor police behavior in Oakland's black neighborhoods. The party received international attention after it staged an armed demonstration against the pending gun control legislation inside the California Assembly in Sacramento. The image of armed black people standing up for their rights electrified black America. Within 3 years, polls showed that 25% of the black population had a great respect for the BPP, including 43% of blacks under 21 years of age. What was more, the BPP's revolutionary nationalist and socialist ideology um, posed a challenge to the established moderate civil rights leaders and to their allies in the Democratic Party. In many inner cities, the Panthers provided essential services like school breakfasts, drug treatment uh, programs that were the victims of chronic underfunding from federal, state, and local authorities. So this section goes on for quite a long time. This is at least another couple of pages, which I don't want to read them all because we'll be here all day and kind
It's
of
okay.
made our point already. Um,
Yes.
so I think to connect this back with um, our discussion of uh, the state and revolution, like I think this issue of the state, especially in the U.S., is bound up with the racialized nature of the state. Like the state is not. I think here's the thing: is that like Lenin and Marx and Engels' definition of the state in terms of like being an instrument of capitalist class rule is like relevant and correct here, but like I think also like the role of white supremacy in the state I think is kind of uh, if we're not careful applying the analysis here, we can kind of uh, underplay it. For lack of better words, which is,
Oh
I
yeah.
think that's, I mean, and like, frankly, I was reading an article, like a Jacobin article this morning that was, I think, kind of, uh, that, I mean, like, it talked about kind of what the difficulties of running socialists as third party candidates. And there was not a single word in this article devoted to um, not a single word in the article devoted to the voting franchise and like how incredibly racist it is.
Yeah, I mean, we live in like, I mean, Canada and the United States for all intents and purposes. Like they're settler colonial states. Like they're
Right.
they're white supremacist oligarchies. They're literally just like a capitalist oligarchy with like a bunch of white dude experiments gone wrong. And like the only way to maintain the survival is to keep doing the same thing they've been doing for 250 years.
Hmm.
Like, and then people are finally starting to realize that this is not acceptable anymore, and they're scared, and they have to use everything. And like the bourgeois party structure is the way, because when you have two parties that just flip flop the entire time, and just sort of feed off each other in this cycle. Nothing ever happens. It's just the same stuff year after year. And people just, I don't know, the complacency. Like a lot of America's like American exceptionalism because like we have made this seesaw like work better than everybody else. So we're really proud that we did that. And sort of American exceptionalism like just falls into this idea that like the status quo electoral process is the only way to have any form of election. And it
Right.
just alienates people. So like anyone that wants to do like a third party, you're not looked as exercising your basic freedoms, your freedoms to choose. You're looked at as an idiot, a dummy, a non-person because
Yeah.
you're not voting part of the two parties. Like I don't know how many times like I said like people would say oh, like who'd you vote for in 2016? It's like, oh, like I voted for Gloria in PSL. And then people are just like, why'd you do that? They're never gonna win. And it's like, well, I mean, I get to vote, right? Like it's my vote. Like, why are
Yeah.
you being like people are so hyper, like fixated and critical on things that you do. But like this is supposed to be the freest country in the world. Like,
Right.
why are you
And
chastising me?
well,
Like
yeah.
people
And like that's propped up as like, and I think some leftists fall into this, but I guess I kind of pick this up more from liberals, which is that
oh
like it's
yeah.
almost like, a more like they treat it as some kind of like moral imperative, or
It's like
like
a
or
zero sum game
like
always.
like or like here's the thing, like, I think it's really when liberals go like, "Oh, it is your fault. It is personally your fault for, Trump's victory is your fault because
Oh,
you voted for Jill Stein, you selfish, privileged lefty." Um, right, have the gall to call us privileged. I
oh yeah, I hate that.
absolutely.
I've had so many of these conversations. People are like from other trans people or other
Oh my
people of
God.
color calling me like a race traitor or like trans misogynistic or some shit because I don't want to support Joe. And it's like that's really like really like and it's
Yeah.
always like white there's like privileged white trans women. And I'm not what I mean by privilege, I'm not saying like wealth or materialism, but just like when you're
White
white
privilege.
like white privilege you can like even if you're non-binary or even if you are trans the whiteness can still protect you. You can
Yeah,
still retreat
absolutely.
like regardless of whether you're on hormones or not or you have body changes you can still retreat to whiteness. You have that ability. And a lot of times I've been told so many times that like I'm devaluing the views of other trans people. And it's like, no, I'm not devaluing your transness. I'm just saying that like whiteness is such a force multiplier in like surviving in this country that
Yeah,
it's so grossly unfair for you to tell me that I'm devaluing your transness when like it's very
yeah.
heavily implied that we both go through the trans experience together.
And
It's ridiculous.
I mean, it's like you said with the whole like, like I think your words were like, you can always go back to whiteness sort of thing. Like, I think the way that I look at it is like, actually, it's even deeper than that. It's like, no, you're stuck with it. You have that no matter what. If you're a white person.
Yeah.
Um,
I guess I'm
and
referring to like liberal trans women that are like just liberal like the white liberal feminist sort of viewpoint where like they don't
yeah,
think about that.
right,
They're
right, because
yeah.
they're dealing with abstract moral categories instead of like actual like people's, lived experiences.
Yeah, that axiom is so important. You
Yeah.
can't let yeah, they pivot so hard on that position.
Um, so, uh, yeah, uh, I think it will be definitely important to, even though I said we're not going to like be summarizing the state and revolution today, I think like it's still good to be reviewing some key parts from it. So this is on page 92 in the Haymarket edition. For those of you who want to follow along, it is chapter. God damn it. um, chapter 3, section 5. Um, we have already quoted Marx's words on the subject, and now we must supplement them. He wrote, "It is generally the fate of new historical creations to be mistaken for the counterpart of older and even defunct forms of social life, to which they may bear certain likeness. Thus, the new commune, which breaks the modern state power, has been regarded as a revival of the medieval communes, as a federation of small states, um, as an exaggerated form of the old struggle against over-centralization. The communal constitution would have restored to the social body all the forces hitherto absorbed by that parasitic excrescence." I love that.
Mhm.
Parasitic excrescence. Parasitic shit. The state. Feeding upon and hampering the free movement of society. By this one act, it would have initiated the regeneration of France. The communal constitution would have brought the rural producers under the intellectual lead of the central towns in their districts, and there secured to them in the town working men, the natural trustees of their interests. The very existence of the commune involved, as a matter of course, local self-government, but no longer a counterbalance to state power, now becomes superfluous. And that's the end of the quote from Marx. Breaking state power, which was a parasitic excrescence, its amputation, its smashing, state power now becomes superfluous. These are expressions that Marx used in regard to the state when praising and analyzing the experience of the commune. All this was written a little less than half a century ago. Now one has to engage in excavations, as it were, in order to bring undistorted Marxism to the knowledge of the mass of people. The conclusions drawn from the observation of the last great revolution through which Marx lived were forgotten just when the time for the next just when the time for the next great proletarian revolution has arrived. Quote, "The multiplicity of interpretations to which the commune has been subjected, and the multiplicity of interests which express themselves in it, show that it was a thoroughly flexible political form. While all previous forms of government had been essentially repressive, it is its true secret was this: it was essentially a working class government, the result of the struggle of producing against the appropriating class the political form at last discovered, which the economic emancipation of labor could be accomplished. Except on this last condition, the communal constitution would have been an impossibility and a delusion." End quote. The utopians busied themselves with discovering political forms under which the socialist transformation of society was to take place. The anarchists dismissed the question of political forms altogether. The opportunists of present-day social democracy accepted the bourgeois political forms of the parliamentary democratic state as the limit which should not be overstepped. They battered their foreheads, praying before this model, and denounced as anarchism every desire to break these forms. I knew we'd find it. There it is.
You did
There's
it.
Lenin laying into the sockdums for calling
Oh,
everyone
oh.
anarchists. Um, I'm just going to read that again because that's such an important passage. And like, here's the thing. This is the part that I think we can really apply to the kind of whatever you want to call that, like Jacobin slash big bread tube line.
Yeah.
Um, the opportunists of present day social democracy accepted as the limit oh, excuse me, accepted the bourgeois political forms of the parliamentary democratic state as the limit which should not be overstepped. They battered their foreheads, praying before this model, and denounced as anarchism every desire to break these forms. I think there was actually an article from Jacobin, like recently in the last like week or so, that like expressly took a shit on like whatever, we can't fall into anarchism or something, like after the Bernie defeat. I'll have to find that when I have a free second. Marx deduced from the whole history of socialism and the political struggle that the state was bound to disappear, and that the transitional form of its disappearance, the transition from state to non-state, would be the proletariat organized as ruling class. Marx did not, however, set out to discover the political forms of this future stage. He limited himself to carefully observing French history, analyzing it, and drawing the conclusion to which the year 1851 had led, namely, that matters were moving towards the destruction of the bourgeois state machine. And when the mass revolutionary movement of the proletariat burst forth, Marx, in spite of its failure, in spite of its short life and patent weakness, began to study the forms it had discovered. The commune is the form at last discovered by the proletarian revolution, under which the economic emancipation of labor can take place. The commune is the first attempt by a proletarian revolution to smash the bourgeois state machine. It is the political form at last discovered by which the state machine can and must be replaced. We shall see further on that the Russian revolutions of 1905 and 1917, in different circumstances and under different conditions, continue the work of the commune and confirm Marx's brilliant historical analysis. Um, I know that was a really long quote, but
Yeah, that's
I
okay.
thought it's one of my favorite passages from State and Rev. So
Yeah.
definitely worth talking about. What stuck out to you there, Mel?
I think a lot of it just is just a big echo to like what we're going through today, especially like the arc of basically the arc of Sanders. It's just it's not working and it just needs to be abandoned. Like there's just this massive echo, I think, of a lot of people currently observing the current cultural climate and going, it's time to abandon electoralism. It's time to abandon electoralism. Um, I don't know if anyone's like willing to like go full hard R, but I think people are finally realizing that it's just producing more dead ends. Um, I there's a lot of people that still want to vote third party. I don't necessarily think that's like the best idea, but like at least it's getting the idea that like having a parallel party is like a solution.
Yeah, I think at the very least, the voting third party. I mean, like I'm
It's just
pretty.
like baby steps, and I'm okay
It's
with it,
such
you
a
know?
minor. It's such a small thing, but like what I think what it's doing, especially if you were to say, like you know, I'm not saying like go out and campaign for Howie Hawkins or something, but like if if people are either like abstaining from voting or voting third party systematically, because I think these have kind of similar effects regardless, is that it's saying, we're not going to be held hostage by the fucking Democrats.
Yeah.
They can't keep playing this lesser evil card over and over again, right? They did the same thing in 2004 with, oh, anybody but Bush, right? Oh, but that lost too. What a surprise.
I remember when I was seeing articles of people that like wanted to basically like it's just people of color who were basically abstaining, and they were replying how they were so disenfranchised with the options that they were handed to they just didn't vote. And I think that says a lot of things about this situation, is that like even the people that the Democratic Party uses as tokens and has always talked about like being the future, they're just not even voting for them anymore. They're not even showing up to elections.
Hmm.
And it's hard to like be one of those people that just doesn't want to vote for the system anymore because you're constantly always told that like you're like this is the party that protects you. And I think changing that culture is like vitally important to
Yeah, it
making the actual like masses start to realize that like this system doesn't work.
right. And I mean, like, I think, like, what was it? Something like 47% of eligible voters just did not even show up to vote in 2016
Yeah.
because, like, I mean, like, that's the thing that I think, you know, people that it's really important to connect with, which is that, I think, and maybe this is just kind of in my ex- experience of, and it's, probably different for everyone in their, local area, which is that, like, I think certain leftists tend to get fixated on, like, oh, well, we need to, like, win over liberals, or, like, even we need to win over reactionaries, which is just, I don't want to get into that here. But I think, like, there's just, like, this ripe opportunity in this political moment to be politicizing people who are depoliticized, like, not, I guess, does that make sense?
Yeah.
And
It's a hard situation because you don't want to alienate people too much because I think a lot of the suck dems like I'm gonna be honest, I think a lot of them are just cowards. Like they see this as the safe way to do socialism. It's so easy to just like make your Wi-Fi password like I don't know, like Bolshevik Lenin party, and then like make your like Wi-Fi home name like 1917 Commune 420, blaze it, and then just like
I have done
donate
my
five.
I have done my duty for the movement today.
Yeah, and like I bought a Soviet flag off of like Amazon. You know what I mean? Like it's like I get it.
Oh, of course, off
Like
of Amazon.
yeah, no, like for like $3, it's from China,
Oh,
whatever. And like I get
Jesus.
it. Like I'm not saying that this is not a bad thing, but like it doesn't do anything if there's no movement or no centralized structure behind it. Just a bunch of people just deciding that like, oh cool, I want to do the red aesthetic or I want to like participate in communism because it's a trendy thing. Like and like there is some validity to it being a trendy cultural thing. Because all the young Zoomers are into the memes, they're into the larpiness, the tanky stuff. Like I get it.
I mean, I'm into that personally. Like, I
Well,
think
like they're
if the aesthetics are, I mean, like, this is maybe a little bit
Oh, aesthetics are
tangential.
super. No, no, no. Aesthetics are crucial. That's not tangential at all. Aesthetics really do like. I mean, because like think about it. Like most of Russia was this agrarian sort of poor-stricken place, and so when everyone and like the aesthetic of everyone that was like rallying against like the like the bourgeois, like all the rich decadent people versus like just like the regular downtrodden citizens, like us looking like them and they not looking like us. It's this like really weird dynamic of just like it doesn't matter whether you're in this time period or another, like there's clear class distinction just based on the aesthetics of how someone lives. Like
Mm,
we still identify the rich with like Trump Tower being made of gold. We still look at rich people with owning like exotic animals or like cars from foreign countries. Like we still look at the same class separation of just
yeah,
ownership through things through
yeah.
means.
And I think for those of you who are, like, at least tangentially familiar with me and my channel, I talk about the institutionalist school of political economy a bit. And Thorstein Veblen is the guy, is the theoretician who you want to look into. Uh, and the book is called, that you'll want to look for, is called The Theory of the Leisure Class, which gets into uh, basically, I think it was written like 1899 or so. So it's like really kind of contemporaneous with Lenin here. But it's basically like lifestyles of the rich and the famous. That's what it is. um, and talks about, how Uh,
That's the Good Charlotte song, right?
yeah, well, it is, but it's also I think the Good Charlotte song is a reference to a TV show of the same name. I
That
could be.
song's great though. I don't care
I
what
love that
anyone says.
song.
The song's good.
Well, they
It's
got
good.
mansions. Think we should rob them. It's like it's kind of funny to think that that song was like popular on the radio. Like a
What do you
song
mean?
overtly telling you to
Like,
go rob rich people was like getting regular airtime.
I love that song so
um,
much.
so I'm while we're kind of meandering off here, I thought that I would
Sorry.
bring no, it's okay. It's all we're having a pretty casual conversation here, which is fine. That's kind of what I wanted. That's what I do on my channel. I try to have these pretty casual conversations, which, by the way, I have a real treat for everyone, which I am announcing now, which is that I have an interview uh, with Red Army Duck. Uh, on he's activist in the Pacific Northwest, and he uh, does things like, it's basically going to be like a mutual aid 101 type thing. Like, how do you get involved with that sort of activism? And he's going to, be kind of addressing those things. He's at Iron Parole on Twitter. And we're just going to be hanging out and talking in kind of a similarly casual way about, um, how to get involved with mutual aid type activism. So
Cool.
I'm going to return. In the meantime, I'm going to return to this favorite book of mine, The Democrats of Critical History, by reading into this. This is good because this will give people some context of kind of the history of the DSA in America and like what it was. I think this book is old at this point. This book is from 2012. Yeah, the first edition was 2008, and this edition that I have is from 2012. So, like, the DSA at the time of the publication of this book was pretty much it would be in no way comparable to what it looks like today. It was, I think, maybe at most a couple hundred people, or maybe a couple thousand at most. And it was really didn't have like it was not a household word like it is today. Socialism, was, other than being the favorite thing of reactionaries to call Obama, like the word socialism really had no mainstream political salience in that era. Um, so this is on page 226. If you'd like to follow along, I don't know. I am presuming that anyone has the book, but I guess if you're watching this after our
Mhm.
stream is over and you want to pick up the book and read this section, it's on page 226 of the 2012 edition. I don't know what page it's on in the 2008 edition. Okay, so this section's called The Left Wing of the Possible. The Democratic Socialists of America, DSA, was formed in 1983 with the intent of participating as a part of the left wing of the Democratic Party in order to change this party itself to turn it into a new kind of mass party. That's a quote from the uh, founding document. Um, the DSA brought together the New American Movement, the New American Movement, a former New Left group, with the old Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee, a remnant of the old Socialist Party. Reflecting the influence of its leading intellectual Michael Harrington, an advocate of the realignment theory of transforming the Democratic Party, the DSA viewed the Democratic Party as a coalition of popular voting blocs. Uh, Women, labor, black voters, and farmers, unbound by any principles. The DSA believed that it should work to strengthen the party's progressive elements and hoped that one day it would grasp the party's leadership, which would put DSA supporters in a position to enact a policy of social reform. In theory, capturing the party in this way would drive the conservatives out, leaving the realigned Democratic Party as something approximating a European style Labour Party. In hindsight, the problems with this approach are clear. Above all, the DSA strategy was flawed because it based on an incorrect assessment of the class. It was based on an incorrect assessment of the class character of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is fundamentally a capitalist party, which means that capitalist interests and not progressive voting blocs really set the party agenda. The big business interests who finance the party have never allowed any serious attempts to implement any party platform planks, such as those calling for the repeal of Taft-Hartley or for the establishment of a national healthcare system. DSA's attempts to influence the party platform to support progressive candidates committed, on paper at least, to those policies often led to activists to frustration. DSA maintains a profile of what it calls the left wing of the possible in the Democratic Party. And again, this book was written in 2012, and I think that the DSA of 2020 is a completely different beast in a lot of ways. But I think this passage is really getting to kind of what the DSA certainly was foundationally and what kind of, I think, still view within the party that still has a lot of, or within, not, it's not a party, the view within the organization that still has a lot of currency. While this position appealed to a number of former 1960s radicals, it had a serious flaw because it was in direct opposition to the proposition that a key task of the left is to expand the boundaries of what is considered politically possible, as 1960s veteran Elbaum noted. Adhering to the left wing of the possible means tailing behind the fluctuations to the right and to the left of the liberal establishment. In 1984, most DSA leaders backed former Vice President Walter Mondale, despite the fact that Mondale was one of the most conservative Democratic candidates since the Second World War. At the rank-and-file level, however, DSA split three ways, with a significant support within the organization for each of the major Democratic candidates: Mondale, Jesse Jackson, and Senator Gary Hart, Democrat from Colorado. The same happened in 1987 when a poll of the organization showed that 51% supported Jackson for the 1988 presidential nomination, 20% supported Senator Paul Simon, and 15% supported no candidate. Instead of maintaining a social democratic pole within the party, the DSA reflected the divisions within the party itself. Instead of the DSA influencing the Democrats influenced the DSA. The DSA's 1987 endorsement of Jackson highlighted another problem with its approach. Explicitly socialist politics had always taken a backseat to its willingness to provide foot soldiers for Democratic election campaigns. DSA leaders, concerned that their choice for candidate could be red-baited for accepting DSA's support, approached Jackson and asked his permission for DSA to endorse him publicly. "We raised the problem with Jackson that we want to support you, but we don't want to support you in a way that would harm you," said DSA co-chair Harrington at the time. Jackson initially balked, but agreed to accept DSA's endorsement. DSA's timidity in publicizing its support for Jackson was certainly a strange way of implementing its minimum goal of moving the Democratic Party leftward, let alone its stated desire of popularizing the ideas of socialism in the United States. This section goes on for another page and a half or so. Mel, do you think this is a good use of our time? I think I'm getting a lot out of rereading this. What do you think? Can't hear you.
Sorry, if you want to keep going, you can.
Yeah, it's let's see, it's another.
I'm pleasantly listening.
Okay, cool. It's another. Let's see. Yeah, it's another page and a half. I think we're getting something out of it, and I think we're keeping our audience engaged here. By the way, chat, if you have questions or
Oh
comments
yeah, if
that you want
anyone
to
wants
make.
to say anything.
I'm trying to be. I'm used to doing the German Revolution stream where we're asking folks to participate a lot more. But this definitely applies here today. So absolutely feel free to, leave your comments or questions in the chat. You know, should be a place where it's safe to ask questions and make comments. Just, don't be a jerk. Common sense type stuff.
I'll try
Um,
and help.
yeah, well, I've got a couple of good mods in the chat, so I have confidence. Um,
Mhm.
DSA often cites prominent Democrats and labor leaders' endorsements of its positions as indications of its influence in shaping the Democratic Party's policy debate. However, the willingness of politicians and labor leaders to endorse elements of the DSA program should not be confused with the influence in the party or the labor movement. As is more often the case, DSA attempts to rally support for whatever so-called progressive programs Democratic liberals concoct, however little they might change the status quo. What's more, one only has to view the records of some self-identified DSA endorsers to see that quite often their commitment to socialism flags when they are forced to transform their words into action. One of the most prominent early supporters of DSA was William Wimpsinger. I'm sorry, that's such I can't read. William Wimpsinger. I'm not going to try to say that again. I'm just going to call him WW. Um, President of the International Association of Machinists during the Reagan era. Although a prominent critic of Reagan and the anti-communist foreign policy of the AFL-CIO, W opposed efforts to increase rank-and-file democracy inside unions and urged machinists to accept widespread concessions in the airline industry. During the momentous 1981 Professional Air Traffic Controllers Organization, PATCO, strike, uh, Reagan's first union-busting success, W urged IAM members to behave like good little trade unionists rather than lead them onto a picket lines in support of PATCO. If IAM members had struck, the PATCO strike would not have been the crushing defeat for labor that it was. W often decried Reaganism, but he failed to act in a case in which his leadership might have defeated one of Reaganism's first assaults on the working class. AFL-CIO President John Sweeney was a leading DSA supporter, um, but few would argue that Sweeney advanced the cause of socialism during his tenure as AFL-CIO leader. The establishment of the New Democrats' hegemony in the Democratic Party during the 1990s led the DSA to reconsider its strategic perspective. Global capitalism and a generation-long employers' offensive had weakened the liberal bases on which the DSA had formed its perspective. As increasingly conservative ideas and policies became the possible in the Democratic Party, the DSA moved away from the idea that its work would realign the Democratic Party. The DSA described its political posture at the end of the 20th century as follows, quote, "If we once positioned ourselves as the left wing of the possible, there is now no possible to be the left wing of. But if this conclusion led the DSA to be less sanguine about its prospects in the Democratic Party, it did not encourage an open break with the Democrats. Instead, it moved into the camp of the inside-outside strategy, nearly identical to the efforts discussed in Chapter 7. Democratic Socialists reject an either-or approach to electoral coalition building, focused solely on a new party or realignment within the Democratic Party. While the revised perspective assigned the main task of the Democratic Socialists to building anti-corporate social movements, uh, these are still largely conceived of in relation to their impact on the electoral arena. Um, since such movement, this is a quote, since such social movements seek to influence state policy, they will intervene in electoral politics, whether through democratic primaries, nonpartisan local elections, or third-party efforts. Our electoral work aims at building majoritarian coalitions capable of not only electing public officials on the anti-corporate programs of these movements, but also of holding officials accountable after they are elected. End quote. The nod toward third-party efforts only went so far. In 2000, DSA's National Political Committee was divided between supporters of the Green Party candidate Ralph Nader, Democrat Al Gore, and Socialist Party candidate David McReynolds. So the organization declined to make any endorsement in the 2000 presidential race. 4 years later, with much of the left convinced that it faced the most important election of our lifetimes, boy, where have I heard that one before?
Oh no.
DSA issued a grudging endorsement of John Kerry on July 23rd, 2004. Quote, Kerry was hardly the first choice of our members. Most supported Dennis Kucinich or Howard Dean in the Democratic primary elections and would be very critical of Senator Kerry's voting record on trade issues, as well as his support for the resolution authorizing the use of force in Iraq. But the most important concern of our members now is to defeat Bush. This feels eerie. This is like,
Oh
I feel like
man.
I'm getting just like, I feel like I'm getting like a headache just thinking about
I don't
this.
want to think about this because it's like
This is too
I don't
depressing to read. I'm
know
gonna,
because I'm living it.
I
And I
know,
was
I
like
guess just one
I
more
was
paragraph left, so I'm gonna
oh
finish
okay,
that and
that's
then we can go in on it.
you're
Um,
good.
said Franklin Llewellyn, DSA's national director. Unfortunately, DSA's action in 2004 was a familiar one for activists who seem fated every election year to fight the good fight during the primaries, then unite behind the Democratic nominee, no matter how conservative. I hate it. Thanks, I
Thanks,
hate
you
it.
live in it.
In the summer of 2008, the organization predictably endorsed Obama over McCain, but hedged its support with calls to build a movement to pressure Obama and the Democrats in Congress. At that time, DSA noted that the November election can't be the end of a fight, but its beginning, and connections made on a local and national level leading up to November can position the left to play a role in the struggles to come. But anyone who may have concluded that DSA wasn't sufficiently committed But if anyone may have concluded that DSA hadn't wasn't sufficiently committed to an Obama victory, DSA honorary co-chair Bogdan Denich made sure to disabuse them of that notion. In an election eve statement published in Democratic Left, DSA's monthly magazine, Denich wrote in a near hysterical tone, reminding DSA supporters of the catastrophic consequences of a McCain-Palin presidency, concluding, "We are duty bound to do what we can to prevent this." In the end, it seems, the argument always comes back to this. No matter how conservative or business dominated the Democrats are, the Republicans are always much worse, and socialists are duty bound to throw their support behind the lesser evil
Oh,
capitalist party. In that way, DSA's reliance on the
uh,
Democrats chains sincere activists, many of whom are attracted to the socialist in DSA's title because they want to see a fundamental change in the system, to one that
I
is
hate this.
the most solid institutions of capitalist rule, the Democratic Party. So yeah, like that
I hate
again,
this so
written
much.
written in 2012,
Uh,
and I really think that like the DSA of today is fundamentally a very different beast, although there's definitely like, the Jacobin bread and roses wing of DSA still kind of behaves like that. Um,
Correct. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, you were about to make some comment, and I cut you off
Oh
so I could
no,
finish. So
no, it's just so textbook awful. Like it's like we're living in like the Weimar Republic. It's like we're living in today. Like every time you read a lot of these texts, I think going from about like 1910 to about like 1920, it's just like we're repeating like small parts of history, and it's just terrifying.
yeah, a lot of I think the
Uh,
comparisons I like to make are more like the the 1890s, just given the level of like organization. Oh, Eve points out the irony is that we wanted Obama because we wanted out of Iraq and Afghanistan, similar to how Bolsheviks got support, but alas. Yeah. Um, I think right. So like I think at towards the tail end of his presidency, George Bush Jr.'s approval ratings like actually were in the single digits because things were just going to shit so
I
quickly.
don't think it was in the civil single digits. I'm gonna look that up.
No, that's probably wrong. Sorry. Don't
Oh man, I got really
mislead you.
excited.
Um, but yeah. Um, give me a
I
sec
want
to
to
look
look up
that
his
up.
approval rating. His
Freund said, oh, sorry,
his
go ahead.
average approval rating was 49%.
Really? That feels high. I mean, average, like over his whole presidency?
So he started at 57. His
Right,
peak was 90 because that
right.
was
9/11.
9/11. His lowest was 31, and that was like during the surge in Iraq. So that
Hmm.
was 2006.
So it did get
And
down into, yeah, almost
and
single
then and
digits.
then his lowest of the low was his handling of the recession, and he
Hmm.
got 28 to 25, and then he ended his presidency with inaugurating Obama at 34.
Yeah, it's pretty. Oh, yeah. So, I'm looking at the chat again. So, uh, Tia Freund says, I feel like DSA has finally given up on most of the Democratic Party, but is still attached to the Bernie wing of it. Yeah, and I mean, like, it's one of those things where it's hard to kind of pick out, the Democratic Party. Its mechanisms are like it's a private organization. It's not like you know people. You can't. It's not like a part. I think in a lot of like European folks who watch the U.S. elections are confused on this because like the Democratic Party is not like a party where you have like a card. Like you can't like pay dues and become a member of the Democratic Party. It doesn't work like that. Like to be like a quote unquote member of the Democratic Party is a very like informal sense. Like you're a Democrat if you vote for Democrats. That's just yeah, that's how it works. And like you're not like a member of the party unless you're like part of the actual like bureaucracy or like whatever, which, that's a career, that's a job. That's not like something that, ordinary people do. And like people who are involved in the, party machinery are like well connected, kind of aristocratic type people.
Yeah.
So it's not like a membership party in the way that like a lot of say like European style labor parties are. Like if you like for example if and maybe somebody I think MLUK is in the chat, maybe he can expand on this, which is that I think to like be a member of the Labour Party in the UK would be like to you actually have to like pay dues and like vote and stuff in their internal politics. But like, you know, Yeah. Democratic Party doesn't work like that. In fact, it was only, I think it was in sometime in the 20th century that the primary system was even like implemented. I think before a certain point there was it was just like picked by some, you know, high ranking party board or something. Um okay, I'm looking at the chat again. Eve says, some states, however, require party registration for primaries. However, other states have open primaries, though you may only be able to choose one party's ballot. Um, okay. Yeah, so to Eve's point real quick, like in think yeah, it depends on which state you're in, but some of them have open primaries where you don't have to be registered to vote in either party to be able to vote in either party's primary. Uh, but like the state I live in Oregon, where if you want to vote in the Democratic Party, you have to register as a Democrat, which is another thing that, you know, both parties use to kind of control that and not let third party challengers make an appearance. It makes it much harder to run third party candidates. Um, and then to Michaela says, uh, if it's not too much in the weeds, what is the difference between the Democratic Party, the DNC, and the DCCC? Okay, yeah. So, uh, Michaela, you're from Germany, aren't you? I can't remember. Sorry if you correct me if I'm wrong there. But yeah, so the Democratic Party is like the formal institution that has like, you know, the people who are members are like senators and congress people and that kind of thing. The DNC is the Democratic National Committee, and I think that that is more like the kind of the formal leadership structure of the kind of logistical end of the party. And then the DCCC is the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, which I think is mostly like a funding apparatus for campaigns for US Congress. So, like, specifically the House of Representatives, because there's also something called the DSCC, the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, which is the corresponding institution for the Senate. Um, yeah, there's a lot of acronyms, and uh, I guess my point about all of them, the DP, the DCCC, the D, the D is all bad. um, yeah, the Democrats are not an institution that you can really get your foot in the same way that, like, if you wanted, if like you were like a radical left sect in Great Britain or something and you wanted to like do entryism into the Labour Party, for example, like there you could do that. Like you could get yourself a Labour Party like membership card, and then like, I mean, there's probably, you know, rules that you have to adhere to within the party, but like, again, so I may be kind of off track here because I don't know the rules of British politics. So, um, Juju says, if you have to register as a Democrat, doesn't it mean that the ballot is not secret in effect? Um, yeah, I mean, I guess like it's less secret. Like you don't have to tell anyone that you registered as a Democrat, but like, but then, you know, the Democratic Party knows that you're registered as a Democrat, and they're going to send you a bunch of gross mailers about, you know, uh, how you have to vote for Democrats.
Yeah, I live in a caucus state, so basically you can only caucus for the party that you register in. So like I have to, like I essentially just have to be a Democrat to like participate. So like because I wanted to vote for Sanders in the caucus, I had to vote, for the party, and it's like just I kind of hate it. I wish it
Yeah,
was just open for anyone
yeah,
because it
and
really limits people. Because like, what if you
yeah,
really like Sanders but you're not a registered Democrat? Like
yeah.
you're an independent. Like it doesn't like
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think that's fundamentally like that's one of the ways that the party worked to kind of keep Sanders out of the running is the fact that I mean, only 20% of the US electorate even, I think, votes in the primaries to begin with. Um, and those people who are like registered Democrats are like not their class character is not uh working class. Like the Democratic Party's like real kind of the it's whatever you want to call it, like it's uh that part of its base is mostly like upper middle class white people, for lack of better words. Like, definitely
no.
not people who, yeah, that's me being salty, but, like, this is not, like, basically, uh, if you want, I kind of lost my train there, but, like, I can't, for example, I'm not registered as a Democrat in my state of Oregon, so I can't vote for Bernie Sanders in the primary. Um, that's how that works.
Hmm.
And it's another kind of uh, incredibly undemocratic way in which the electoral system here operates. And even though like nominally uh, uh, non-whites have political franchise extended to them here, it's still a system that's fundamentally geared toward like you know white supremacy. So
Yeah.
I mean, that's really all I had to say on that matter.
Oh no. Yeah. No. I agree. I think you
Um,
summed it up really well.
yeah, I'll do my best. So I guess I think maybe uh, next time, because I think we're kind of we've been talking for a while now. I'm gonna see, we got um, but I think next time we should be talking about more things in the state and revolution as they apply to the current situation. Because today I think we did a good job of kind of explaining the context of, you know, uh, Lenin's polemic against the reformists and opportunists in the German movement.
Yeah. It was
And
a
I
good
think,
setup.
right, and I think that we have to I think what we've done today is kind of re-perform that same kind of critique of left, whatever you want to call it, left liberalism or left opportunism, as it exists today in the contemporary United States, where we have kind of the dominant faction of DSA kind of leading this charge of like, oh, we can get Bernie Sanders elected, and then everything will be sunshine and rainbows, or whatever tripe they're serving up next week.
My
Um,
favorite phrase they yell is harm reduction.
oh God, no, don't even. No, I hate it. Whose harm? Whose harm are you reducing? Please tell me. Actually, no,
They
don't tell
love
me.
that. They really love the word harm reduction.
I really hate that because that term is from like drug abuse prevention and like addiction treatment and stuff. And like it's just a horrible like vulgarization, I guess, of that term that does it a disservice. And it's like, even if it was like again like who's you're really not materially reducing anybody's harm, right? Like for example, like the Obama presidency, I think, is a real like illustration of that. Like ICE expanded under Obama. Obama deported more than 2.3 million immigrants. The
Hmm.
drone wars expanded radically. The surveillance states expanded radically. You are like materially and historically, you are not doing harm reduction by voting
Oh yeah, he
Democrat.
like renewed the Patriot Act.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think
Like
like
like what the hell?
the thing that I think most people can square with is that that's probably true with Biden, but the thing that I'll say unapologetically and probably get a lot of shit for is I think that you're effectively doing the same thing with Sanders. Like even if Sanders had somehow made it past that hurdle, I think that would be we'd be fundamentally dealing with the same problem. So I think this is a good time to kind of wrap things up for today. I think
Mhm.
we've had a really good conversation, and I wanted to thank Melanie for coming on with me. And I think the response to this in the chat has been really positive. Thank you, everyone, for coming in. I'm going to drop my link here, this little break screen, to encourage folks who like the content that I put out here on this channel to support me through my Patreon. If you can, I can uh, be supported for as little as $1 a month, and it just helps me uh, be able to do this more often. Uh,
Mhm.
and and even if it's just a small amount, it kind of shows that you support the channel and the work that we do here with political education. That's what this channel is all about. It's about learning and applying radical Marxist theory to the current moment. And so if that's what you're into, follow me on Twitter, like, share, comment, subscribe, all the usual YouTube stuff. Um, and I'll talk with Mel and Mel here, and we'll see
Mhm.
what the next session will be. Hopefully, maybe within the next couple weeks, we'll have another episode. Haven't quite figured that all out yet. This was a pretty experimental format to begin
I'm
with.
pretty excited though. This is fun.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun. I really
I
had a
feel like
lot
I
of,
learned a lot, as in just like it's nice to hear
yeah.
a bunch of stuff that I haven't heard in a while.
Yeah, and again, like I wanted to reiterate for folks, like this was not wanting to be like a discussion of state and revolution in and of itself, or like a text summary or anything like that. This was always like we had gone from the outset here intending to kind of be using state and revolution as our framework, as our theoretical point of departure, kind of assuming that you might be at least tangentially familiar with it as a text. So if you haven't read it yet, between now and our next session, go ahead and you can find it on Marxist.org, um, and you can read it for yourself. And if you find that difficult, um, I would definitely recommend Revolutionary Left Radio's companion uh, breakdown of that text with Brett and Allison. I think you can look that up on YouTube, or it's on their website, revolutionaryLeftRadio.libsyn.com, I think, .com. Anyway, I'm going to check real quick. Yeah, libsyn.com, libsyn.com. But yeah, again, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for all my patrons for supporting the show, and we will see you sometime soon.